Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight, and welcome to the Johnson Family Center for the Performing Arts here at the Minnesota JCC for tonight's discussion of how theater can address anti-Semitism, presented by 6 Points Theater in partnership with TC Jewfolk and the Minnesota JCC, has been said. I'm your moderator, Lonny Goldsmith. I'm the editor of TC Jewfolk, and before we get started, I wanted to introduce tonight's panel. To my right, Avi Aharoni, who has appeared in a number of 6 Point shows as an actor, including Shul and Natasha on the Coat, and his self-written filmed production of his one-man show, Operation Immigration, which was subsequently retitled My Father's Son. It won the Golden Lanyard Award at the 2019 Minnesota Fringe Festival. Warren C. Bowles, who has directed several shows, including Jericho, Photograph 51, The Last Schwartz, and The Tale of the Elogist Wife, for which he won an Ivy Award. And as an actor, he appeared in The Whipping Man, and in 2005, he received a McKnight Fellowship for Theater Artists. Kim Kivens has performed with 6 Points Theater in several shows, including 25 Questions for a Jewish Mother, The Hanukkah Guest, and What I Thought I Knew. She has also worked on the stages of Theater La Teda, Children's Theater Company, Hennepin Theater Trust, and Park Square Theater, among others. Robert Dorfman is an actor, director, and producer who has worked in theater, television, and film all over the country. Late last year, he was named the director of Wellsprings and New Play Development at 6 Point Theater, where he will advance the theater's mission to develop new plays that look at life through a Jewish lens and reveal the common threads of humanity within the goal of bringing new Jewish plays to national awareness. And last, certainly not least, is Barbara Brooks, the founder and producing artistic director of 6 Points Theater. In this capacity, she has been responsible for all artistic and management work at the theater and has produced all 6 Point Theater productions to date, which is a whole lot of shows, I would imagine. Those shows have garnered 5 Ivy Awards and the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council's Arts Achievement Award. Thank you all for being here. This is fantastic. So, Barbara, I wanted to start with you. As the founder of 6 Points Theater 28 years ago, what did you see as the purpose for the founding of a Jewish theater, and how have you been able to stay true to that purpose?
Well, 6 Points Theater was founded as the Minnesota Jewish Theater Company with the goal of providing opportunities for Jews and non-Jews to come together, to experience great stories, and to learn about Jewish history and culture, and also see similarities that people have from all backgrounds. And these opportunities were, our goal was to provide them for both children as well as adults through the telling of great stories.
So, Robert, in your new role at 6 Points Theater, and it is a brand new role, as I said, started in November. You're on the lookout for new plays. You were the producer of the new play festival that took place last year. It was the first time 6 Points had done something like this. How are you seeing anti-Semitism being addressed in some of the new shows that you're seeing? Or are you not seeing it quite yet?
You know, I'm about as old as Methuselah. So I've been around a long time, and we're in very complicated times right now. Anti-Semitism, it's never disappeared, but it's rearing its ugly head lately, and it's being supported by people who really should know better. So for me, looking to produce new plays, I'm interested in plays that don't shy away from the complicated times we live in. And you present it in the theater, which is a safe space of people of a variety of opinions and backgrounds and cultures and ideas can sit and listen to the same story, and you can meet your neighbors in the dark. So I'm always looking for plays with humor and entertaining, but still plays that at least skirt around, if not directly hit into the real issues of the day.
Warren, to sort of follow up on that, when you're looking for plays to direct, and you're in that role, what are you looking for? Are you looking for plays that don't have a problem being controversial? Because this is obviously something that, it's not controversial. I don't want to call anti-Semitism controversial, but it is certainly something that can make people uncomfortable in this space.
Yes, and I don't think I look for things that are trying to be controversial. I don't look for things that are very polemic. I really hope to do things that are good theater. And you go, what does that mean? The theater itself, the conflict in there is essential to good theater. Now, if the conflict centers around racism, anti-Semitism at all, that's kind of a good thing. I have been interested in the fact that a number of young black playwrighs, I think of Brandon Jacob Jensen's Neighbors, who are at a point that they say, we don't want our traditional complaints and difficulties and discussions about race. And I'm wondering, too, if there's a sense of that, and I would go back to Robert on that in the terms of anti-Semitism. Although things have changed, we just talked about it before we stepped up here. I've been just incredibly shocked when I heard Jews will not replace us and Jewish space lasers. It's like times have changed when those can be spoken openly. It's, whoa. But I go to again, do we look of new ways of discussing? I'll talk.
No, and it's true. I mean, Barbara and I are always having this discussion because I use this expression that we want to redefine what Jewish theater, Jewish stage literature is. And she's always urging me, don't redefine it too much so that we can't recognize it. But yeah, you know, a theater experience is a play written by a fine mind that's being interpreted by fine artists and designers, and you want it to have, you know, all the elements of great drama, great comedy, and that's conflict. And two or more points of view neatly and detailed. And then you want the play to give you some sort of resolution so that you can talk about it over coffee the next day. For me, I want the play to reflect what people's lives are today. And we're all going through, as Americans, let alone as American Jews, we're going through a barrage of horrific circumstances. You know, I mean, there is the hint of anti-Semitism in misinformation like space lasers, but that's almost laughable. But you know, our synagogues are being desecrated. People are being shot up. We don't have a safe space always to exchange who we are, to, as Barbara likes to say, to help repair the world. So, yeah, I'm all for edgy stuff.
Well, and just to piggyback off of that, yes, it's hard to find a space for us to congregate safely nowadays. But also, I mean, are we all Jewish people in this crowd here? Are we preaching to the choir here, so to speak? How do we reach the masses? There were programs that, like the holiday show that we would do, and being a part of that in the past, seeing all these diverse children in our audience, knowing that we were teaching them about Judaism, and they probably didn't know what a Jewish person was.
That reminds me, back when we did, I used to know every show and what year it was done, and I have lost track after over 100 shows, but we did commission a play called Hanukkah Lights in the Big Sky, which was based upon the tree events in Billings, Montana back in the early 90s, when a racist threw a brick through a Jewish family's window where there was a menorah. And the town of Billings came together, led by church leaders, civic leaders, and decided that they were going to take a stand and they would not accept that kind of behavior in their town. There was actually a book written, I believe it's called Not in Our Town, but 10,000 Christian families came together on Christmas and put menorahs in the windows. So we commissioned the play and we produced it and got feedback, which we often do from teachers. They'll have their students draw a picture and say what they liked or who their favorite character was. And from a 9-year-old boy at a charter school in St. Paul, we got something that said, "I learned why not to hate Jewish people." And that is one of those pieces of feedback, especially in children's writing, that I will never forget, that keeps me going and tells me that we are providing these opportunities. But getting back to what Kim said, I just want to mention that over the years, we have consistently taken data. If you call for a ticket or you purchase a ticket online, you will be asked a few survey questions. And we continually try to assess the backgrounds of our audiences. And it is uncanny, but throughout all of these years, approximately 50% of our audience is not Jewish. I think that theater provides a great opportunity for people to come together and experience something together. We are all seeing it together and learning together. And that provides a place where we can discuss and acknowledge the real world versus, sitting in our homes and individually watching a movie and then talking about it. Here we're all together. And one of the reasons why we like to do a lot of post-show discussions or programs that are on non-show days, Doorways programs, we have Zoom programs more lately, is because it provides this follow-up where people can discuss what they all saw together.
Yeah, I think with that, theater, in my opinion, more than most, if not all, other art form, it is exactly that, the collectivism of the symbiotic relationship between audience and actors and designers and directors and technicians, and it all has to work together, and without one thing, it's not fully theater. And with that sort of collective engagement, it's a place, it's a safe space that challenges and comforts almost at the same time. It comforts those who may not, who need to be seen, and it challenges those who may need to see. More than I think, movies, you said, movies are so almost individual, and there's also a separation because there's a screen, the actors aren't right there. You don't get to feel it in the same way, and that empathy in theater is so palpable, and it's really kind of that magic sauce. If you're in an audience and you're experiencing this empathetic experience all together over 2 hours, you don't get that in any other way.
No, not at all. And I think back to something that Kim and Barbara were talking about with the Hanukkah shows, which are done, many of the performances during the morning or afternoon during a school day. And I went to one to write about, I wish I could remember which it was, but it was a full house of school kids, and me and a handful of teachers, we were the adults that were there. And there was just something so cool about seeing a really diverse audience of school kids, like you said, learning about Hanukkah and learning about Judaism, even if it is only, I'm using air quotes here, only cultural Judaism, but you're learning about a facet of Judaism in a way that they may not otherwise get to learn about. And I think there's something really neat about that, which really underscores a key value, the key value proposition, I think, of Six Points Theater and Jewish theater in general. But, it's one thing to sort of address anti-Semitism in Jewish theater, because it, in a lot of ways, reflects the issues that Jews and Jewish people are facing on a regular basis. But all of you have worked in non-ethnic specific theaters as well. How do you think that the theater at large can go about addressing anti-Semitism as an ongoing issue?
I think that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done.
Okay.
I hear from people that there's diversity training that's happening, but I've had personal experiences in the last 6 months at 2 pretty well-known theaters where anti-Semitic comments have come up, and I don't think they realize that they're saying it. Saying something like, "Oh, I'm the shoe Nazi." Saying something like, "Oh, if I were a Jewish mother," that's when a non-Jewish person saying to me, the Jewish mother in me comes out when I figure out that I'm spending too much money. Stuff like that. And that's stuff that has been said to me by people who I would think are liberal-minded people, and I just don't even think that they realize that they're saying this stuff. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. Also, I feel that the Jewish stories, a lot of musicals were written by Jewish people. They still are. And there are Jewish characters in these musicals, and they are being erased because they're afraid to say you cast a non-Jewish person in a Jewish role. And so it gets diluted down because they're worried that the stereotypes are going to show through with this non-Jewish person playing this Jewish person. There's something wrong there, I think. We're being erased, in a sense, when you do something like that.
There is another aspect, though. When theaters such as 6 Points, which formerly the Minnesota Jewish Theater Company, were formed, nobody was telling our stories, so Barbara was smart to find a safe space to tell those stories. But I think there's, every theater now is a bridge theater among cultures. I had the good fortune to do 2 particular plays at the Guthrie, for instance, 2 pivotal Jewish plays, if you can call them that, The Merchant of Venice and Paul Vogel's Indecent. And they were both extremely affecting, and I think we reached an audience that the size and scope of which we might not have reached in a smaller theater, a smaller boutique theater. And we had all the right conversations, even though we may not have come to the right resolutions about them, but sometimes asking the right questions are what's important.
I wonder, and this comes from a discussion that we've had, Robert, too, picking up on what Avi was saying, when we talk about the theater being a safe space, do we want it to necessarily be a safe space? And I think of Dr. King talking about the steps towards direct action. And I don't know that the theater can really do direct action in opposing anti-Semitism. I think of Teatro Campesino with the migrant workers going out and working with the migrant workers and the community and all. Yes, there is that kind of thing. But there's also a place for kind of version of what King calls the self-purification. Do we really discuss what it is to be Jewish? And this is, we went back, Robert. What is a Jew? And is it universal? In the car coming over, I heard them referencing Jewish values, and I was brought up with an incredible respect for Jewish values, largely because of education and support of the civil rights movement. But I've also come across Jews who I kind of go, their sense of values, I don't know if I really want that as Jewish value. What is it to be a Jew? Define that for me. Is it cultural?
Well-
Is it religious?
Well, first of all, I don't think we have enough time tonight. to get into
Exactly.
that.
Bingo.
That's for
Bingo.
next time.
That's right. That's
We're like
that's part
snowflakes.
two.
I warned you, I take the time, so grab a lunch.
Well, and that's why I think it's important when you're doing a show that's not at 6 Points, when it's a show that's a non-ethnic theater and there happens to be Jewish content or Jewish characters, I think it's important that there's more than one Jew in the room.
Ding, ding.
Because my Jewish upbringing is so far different from probably your upbringing and your upbringing and your upbringing and yours. And no two Jews are alike.
And I will say, like, along those lines, I mean, I think theaters, non-ethnic theaters, if you're going to produce and work on a particular story of a particular people who do come from all over the world, and there's different cultures and languages and backgrounds amongst Jews, to do the work of being, in my opinion, as authentic and real as possible, and filling that rehearsal room as best you can, but at least taking the effort to fill the rehearsal room with Jews. And I think that obviously depends on the size of the theater, the scope of the reach, and their resources. But I think for me, the important part is that you're trying. I just try to get to that point. And you're right. You can ask all the right questions and still get to. I mean, we talked about it. I saw Indecent, and I was a little offended by some of the things. And if there was a conversation, then that's great. There was effort made, and it's a super fine line, and I don't have the answer for it, but it's something that I'm very cognizant of.
I'll tell you, when we did Merchant of Venice, it's a very controversial play. Some people refer to it as an anti-Semitic play. I think part of it was saved by having a Jewish actor in the role of Shylock. But it actually became quite a scandal. The newspapers picked up the question, is it anti-Semitic, and can we do anti-Semitic plays? And the wonderful woman, Sheila Livingston, who we lost this year, but she was a beautiful spirit Jewish woman who was in charge of outreach, and she and I every day got in her car and went out to every synagogue in the Twin Cities to plead our case. I only bring that up to say that we started the right conversation.
And that's feels like it's a key to me, is that you had the conversation and that you started it and you asked the right questions and you were receptive to those answers to be able to then comfortably go do the role.
And I think,
I was just going to interject. I wholeheartedly agree that we want to have Jewish people in the room telling Jewish stories, but I think it's important to remember, too, that we strive for artistic excellence, and the work begins with the playwright, and we want to bring the playwright's words to life in the truest way. So we do need to have skillful actors who can do that, and sometimes it might be a non-Jewish actor playing a Jewish role. It just depends on every different situation.
Well, I think of the fact that at least on one occasion, I've come to you, Barbara, when you've said you wanted me to direct a show, and I said, I don't know. I think you might want a Jew for a director here in this. I think it might be important. And Barbara
what did I say?
Barbara would say, no. I want your theater skills. That's what I'm looking for here, and you will be doing the research on those aspects that you're feeling uncomfortable about. And I think I hope she was right on. People's Violin is the primary example of that, where my initial thing was, boy, I don't know.
Well, and that doesn't mean that we just let it go and hope for the best.
No.
I mean, we will bring in a dramaturg or someone just to consult and do research.
well, and I wonder also, going back to Kim's original point, is about the conversation, right? How often is this conversation actually outside of 6 Points, like in the theater world around the country? Is this conversation about Jewish representation, Jewish art, who tells whose story, is that being talked about? And more often than not, at least from what I'm seeing, if it is, it's very new and recent, and it's a bubbling of a conversation. It's not the forefront of any discussion along these lines. Is that, I mean, more or less what I think you were getting at originally.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, my experience coming into a role playing someone who's Jewish, which I rarely get to do. Thank you, Barbara, because you've cast me as a Jewish person. The first time I've ever played a Jewish person was at 6 Points. And we don't, what does Judaism look like? But whatever.
Well, that's exactly true. When I have to share, when Kim came into audition, and she got called back, and it was going to be Friday afternoon, and she said to me, well, what time will these callbacks be over? Because I have to get home to make Shabbat dinner.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, I had no idea Kim was Jewish.
Whereas I come in with my chest hair poking through my shirt, and you're like, we got it. We know.
And you said I can be here until 8. No.
Yeah, I don't mind.
But going back to this, as a Jewish person, I'm bringing to the table my experience culturally and religiously, depending on who I am, that maybe a non-Jewish person can't bring. And whether you can fill that room with, thank you, whoever you are, I love you. Whether you can, and that's why it's important to have more than one Jewish person in the room.
Preach it.
Maybe 3 or 4 would be great.
I mean, it goes down to authenticity, right?
Right.
It's just being as authentic as you can be given the circumstances.
Right.
And of course, and I think it has to happen. And of course, the challenge is because it's just on the stage, we all see our Judaisms, when we come at it from different angles. I think that's always the challenge. What offends me might not offend you. And so, yeah, I think it's just having the conversation and knowing that we're unlikely to come to a satisfactory resolution, right? I mean, but we're going to try. So,
Can I
please.
add one thing on that? And this may be kind of a sidebar, but goes back to what Barbara started with us. When we talk about what can the theater, and I would think this theater, do about anti-Semitism, we've come around a lot to the discussion of what Judaism is, and how comfortable we are discussing it, and being able to take the risk of it means different things to different people. I think that's one of the key things that theater can do now that it didn't used to do. The Yiddish theater wasn't really, it was welcoming, but it wasn't. I would sit through a whole production, it's like, well, was that any good? Because I didn't understand a word of it at all. And although it was certainly the epitome of a safe space, it was exclusionary. And I think that's what's changed. The theater now says, come in and learn. And as you learn, hopefully we decide that it goes beyond just the fact that you will put a menorah in your window as an ally. There's much more to understand in there.
And I think Barbara, having started this 25 years ago, 28, I think that notion was before before the times where anybody was even, we always had Fiddler on the Roof and Diary of Anne Frank. That was sort of Jewish theater. And then, that's why I think the beautiful thing about 6 Points is just like there's no image of what a Jewish person is, looks like, acts, everything. There's no that same thing can be equated to. What's a Jewish story? There's so many things that can be a Jewish story, and I think that's the beauty of 6 Points is you're finding the shows that are Jewish stories for one reason or another, but it challenges the audience to think about what a Jewish story is.
Thank you, Avi.
Stop.
John O'Neill in the Free Southern Theater, they would go out in small companies in the South in the 60s and early 70s. And he was talking about what was known as black theater in the time period wasn't something he could do for these Bible Belt small communities whose very essence of what it is to be black is different than what it was in the big urban centers and all. For all of us, there are different stories of who we are.
So, Avi, you mentioned Fiddler on the Roof. It is probably, at least to me, the most famous example of how anti-Semitism is addressed on stage. Are there other examples of works that people should be looking for that also talk about it in maybe a more modern or current lens?
Wow. Silence.
My Father's Son, Searching for Identity, written by Avi Aharoni. Directed by Robert Dorfman.
If I were a rich man. I've always wanted to play that part.
You still could.
Yeah. It was done in the Twin Cities.
I know.
You know, an interesting thing is happening. I don't know how many of you know, I mentioned Paul Vogel's Indecent. It's a play about a play written by Sholem Asch that was censored. It's the history of that. It was, the police came when it finally went to Broadway and they closed it down. And at the center of the piece are two young women in lesbian love. In Jacksonville, Florida, only a month ago, a high school had decided the students were going to put that show up. And as is happening all over, but particularly in Florida, the powers that be pulled the rug out from under them and said they can't do it. They had already done Rent. They had done Chicago. So for me, they sort of centered on the lesbian story, but I felt that there was the foul taste of anti-Semitism in that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I had heard about that and then read more about it in preparation for this, and I'm glad you brought that up though, because that was definitely definitely something. Yeah, I agree. Definitely had a twinge of anti-Semitism to it. You know, on the flip side, though, London, we sort of talked about this before we came on. There was a London theater group had canceled a reimagined version of Romeo and Juliet with a Jewish girl and a boy that's a member of the Hitler Youth. And we touched on it a little bit, but what responsibilities do you think theater companies have when it comes to portraying not just Jews, but other marginalized groups when it comes to casting and producing a show?
Again, having more than one person in the room that represents said marginalized group that you're putting the production on of, because we're going to learn from each other. Not just, like, say, Avi and I are in a show together, and our experiences are completely different, but we're going to learn from each other. Oh, you did this way, I didn't do it that way. Oh, just like you said, having these conversations, we're going to continue to agree, hopefully, to disagree. But definitely, whatever it is, making sure that you have enough representation of whatever marginalized group you're putting that production of, making sure that they're represented properly.
And yes to all that. I see theater as one of two things. It's a window or a mirror. You know, it's a window to see the life of someone or people or an experience that you don't ordinarily get to see, or it's a mirror for you to look back at yourself and reevaluate your beliefs and your thoughts and your, who you are. And I think keeping that in mind as a theater company, with any show, it's the same thing. It's having that respect of the responsibility of you're doing theater, you're making a show, you're making a theater. People are spending, they're finding babysitters and they're buying tickets and they're doing everything to come see you. And you have to remember that that's so sacred. People's time is so sacred, and to really respect that while doing the job of holding up the mirror or opening a window for them.
And I think respect is a key word. It is, like you said, it's not an inexpensive night out.
Right.
So to be able to respect the audience enough to do it that way, I think, is meaningful. One of the 6 artistic values of 6 Points Theater is tikkun olam, repairing the world. How important is it for each of you to work in a place where you're not just told it's important, but it is a named value that is a core piece of the organization?
I got to tell you, it's everything. I moved here about 10 years ago. I tell this story incessantly, but you don't have
Tell
to
it
ask
again, tell it again.
But I was born in New York. I spent much of my young adult life there. Then I moved to LA. Everybody in LA is schlepping around. Everybody in New York is Jewish in some way. But when I moved here, I suddenly felt my otherness at my ripe old age. There's a great history of anti-Semitism in the Twin Cities, and when you come fresh from a place where Jews are very welcomed, it's quite palpable. Anyway, so I virtually knocked on Barbara's door and said, "I'm an actor and I'm a Jewish man, and I need refuge." And God bless her, she put me to work. And I think the reward of that work is exactly what you're saying, that we're doing something that is rebuilding the dignity of a culture, a population, a history, and we do it regularly, and we do it with the best artists in town, and this town is filthy with terrific theater artists. And we do it all under the leadership of Barbara Brooks, who is a great man of the theater.
Mic drop.
There are other ways, too, of finding that otherness that you're talking about and being aware of and how it drives you. And to your point, yeah, a lot of why I do theater and have from the beginning, I started my theater work, the major part of it, in a large university that's known for being Catholic, and of a student body of about 7,000, there were 12 black students, most of whom were athletes. And yeah, there was that sense, theater, I found a sense of fighting the otherness. I did have one of my friends and was in our dormitory that one day he just caught me on the wrong foot. And I just started railing on him. "Rick, you have no idea what it is to be so visible and isolated in this unit." And I went on and on about the troubles of being black and among all of these 7,000 white people and all. "You just don't understand, Rick." And he listened until he got sick of it and said, "Whoa, Warren, shut up. Remember, on this campus, I am the other Jew." He was a rabbi in Temple University now, but it's like, yeah, I shut up after a while. Yeah, there's lots of ways of feeling your otherness.
All right, well, with that, I wanted to thank all of you for coming tonight. I wanted to thank Ben Cohn and the arts and culture staff here at the Minnesota JCC for setting all of this up and taking such good care of us tonight. Thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. Have a great night. The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jewfolk Podcast Network, a product of Jewfolk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.